Hi everyone, so we're going to get started here. I'm Anicka Quin, Editor-in-Chief of Western Living magazine, and we're about to start our design talk with designer Amanda Hamilton, who's joining me for the next half hour or so. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to be talking about what it means to work with an interior designer today.
Yes.
Why don't we first start with just a little bit about your firm. You're actually in here from Calgary.
I am. I'm from Calgary. Nice quick flight. I'm actually here for IDS West, and we're actually showcasing some of our products that we've developed as part of our company, but we do have an interior design firm, and we've recently launched an accessories company as well. These are some of our pillows.
You got a couple of them here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're gorgeous. One of them is a little bit metallic, right? The one back here?
Yeah, so I actually hand paint all of these pillows while drinking wine, of course, because that's the only way you should do it, while listening to very loud music. But yeah, I paint these all with metallic acrylic paint, and then they're actually on a black linen, and we have them sewn, hand cut and hand sewn locally in Calgary.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, let's start a bit with the basics. So,
Sure.
What does an interior designer do? Why does somebody hire an interior designer?
Well, an interior designer does a lot of things. It's true, once in a while we do fluff pillows, but the job is actually quite technical. We do a lot of space planning where we address clients' needs in terms of sort of important adjacencies in a space, functional requirements, what you require in your kitchen, and heavily detail all of those things so that when you move into your home, you essentially have a place for everything. So that means doing all of the construction drawings that you need to do, including all of the locations of your light fixtures, your plugins, your audio-visual equipment, as well as all your finishes and materials. And then, of course, we get down to doing the furniture layout, furniture specifications, etc.
Yeah. The plugins thing is actually interesting. I have a friend who did a kitchen renovation and ended up with just one plug-in, two plugs in his kitchen. So it's something like, it's details like that that designers really have to be on top of, right? Because it's not something you're necessarily thinking of while you're building a kitchen. You're not thinking of the small appliances, you're thinking of the big stuff. But
absolutely.
Designers do.
And it's about having those really important conversations with your interior designer to make sure that your designer really understands what it is that you need in a kitchen. Because some people have, a blender, a toaster, a juicer, everything out on their counter. So we need to make sure that we've actually provided the requirements for you to sort of actually live efficiently in your own home. It's not just about it being pretty, it's about it being super effective for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, but speaking of pretty, we're going to go through a few designs.
But it can be pretty too.
Yes, a little bit about some of your work, and we're going to go through some of the projects while we go back and forth on what a designer does. So why don't you tell me a little bit about this space?
So this is a really interesting project for us because when we went into the home, this had actually been a previous different client of mine. And we did a renovation for this client, and it was actually photographed and put into Western Living magazine. And then a couple months later, there was the floods in Calgary that I'm sure everybody heard about, and there was about 5 feet of water up on the main floor. So this is actually the second renovation that we did. Really interesting process because the clients had just gone through working out what they wanted for their home. And just because they flooded, there was this sort of need to be like, well, now would we do anything different? So it became this really interesting conversation about, would they redo these things or should they change them? And there was very few things that we changed, actually. They really had loved what we did before, and we just tweaked a few things.
Okay, so in this room, we actually spent a little bit of time talking about color and pattern with Ali Velji yesterday.
Yeah.
We've got a bit of that happening in this room too. Is there anything you can highlight here throughout the space?
Well, this client really loves sort of a monochromatic palette. So in a way for that not to look boring then sometimes when you have that sort of tone on tone, we added little pops of pattern. So there's the sort of like pillows with the black stripes on them, and the pillows on the left-hand side sort of have an sort of E-cat pattern, and then just really sophisticated pops of color. So nothing super bold, which always feels really out of place on a monochromatic palette, just really soft like oranges and pinks, plants, etc. And more about layering texture than color.
Right.
Yeah.
It's texture people don't always think of, right? They're often thinking color. Even that throw beside you adds texture and warmth into a space in a way that just adds dimension.
Absolutely.
We've got another shot in the same place, so you can see a better shot of some of that pillow that you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
More details here. You've got a little bit of gold accent, it looks like, on the counter too.
Yeah.
People are starting to bring a lot more metallics into their spaces right now.
Yeah, and I think there's this sort of rule that people think you can't actually mix metals, but we love to mix metals, especially when it comes to these things that are trends, right? So bronze and brass are super trendy right now, but if you mix them with chromes and other metals, which we've done in this room, oil rubbed bronze, then no one metal sort of continuously sticks out. Nobody goes like, oh, well, you must have done that room in 2015. Sort of like the oak we're all trying to remove from our home from the 80s, right? So by mixing the metals together, you kind of get that fun, fresh feel without it having it feel too trendy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me a bit about your process. You mentioned this one was interesting because you got to actually do the process twice, but let's say someone says, okay, yeah, I want to work with an interior designer for a renovation. Where does it all start? What does the person do?
Yeah.
What do you do?
I mean, I think it's really important for anybody who's thinking about renovating to actually interview a couple of interior designers. While we'd of course love to get all of the clients, not all the clients are right for us, and it's the same thing for you. I think it's really important to figure out if that's the right relationship, because renovations can be very stressful. There can be some tension at times, so you want to make sure that when you're sitting down with somebody, you're really comfortable with that. So I always start with a great meeting with a client where we sit and chat and we sort of get to know each other before we actually agree on both sides if we're good fits for each other. And then from there, you start the creative process. But before you do any of the sort of fun, pretty things that we mentioned, we actually will talk about the functional requirements in the home. You know, sort of those adjacencies that I was talking about, like who needs to be next to who and where do items need to be to have, you know, it really functional. Even when you're talking about in a kitchen is a perfect example. How somebody works in a kitchen might be different than, you know, you and I probably cook very differerly in a kitchen. Right. You know, somebody who's right-handed or left-handed will actually use their space very differently in a kitchen.
Tall people, yeah.
Height is a factor, ergonomics are a factor. We've got clients that are very, very tall, so we'll raise up the countertops. And then, you know, also people that are a little bit on the shorter side like me, who it's like, okay, well, if we can just lower that a little bit, that would be nice.
Right.
Yeah.
I think too, people often think if you're building your dream home, you should make it as big as possible because that's what you need. But space isn't always about being big. It can be about it being well planned.
The biggest problem that we see with people who have these really large homes is they come to us as interior designers and they say like, I've got this room, we never go in it, there's no furniture in it, and I don't know what to do with it. And there's probably some people sitting here, they're like, oh my gosh, she's talking about my bonus room, I have nothing in it, nobody ever goes in there. So I think, you know, location's really important, but it's more important that the spaces inside the home are actually being used. Otherwise, what's the point of having them, really? Yeah.
Right. Let us go back to some more pretty pictures. So this is the same place we were talking about.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to the next project? Unless there's anything specifically you want to highlight here?
This is still the same house, so again, just sort of featuring the dining room here. Just, you know, again, we switched up the furniture on this time round, and they moved their furniture to another property, and so that was sort of fun to be able to do another furniture package with them.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is actually a great shot. I think that there's a lot of people now that are changing up the way that they're living. We're sort of, older homes tend to be heavily partitioned. So, you know, you've got your formal dining room in one room and your living room in one room. And this home does actually have that, but they also have this really great space. So this is sort of, you know, an informal living area or a den. But then there's a breakfast nook behind it and the kitchen behind it. So when you have kids, it's really great. If you've got sort of a stay-at-home parent, they're actually able to, you know, they end up being in the kitchen a lot, as you know, and so they can be in the kitchen and still actually see their kids sort of playing in the living room, or the breakfast nook or that table, that informal dining area becomes a place where people use their laptops or their iPads or, you know, color, etc. Right. So this client still has, they have 3 kids, believe it or not, but they still wanted a really stylish sort of hip interior. We hit all the toys.
I was going to say, speaking of laptops, a lot of people are designing their islands to be able to work with, because everybody seems to end up in the kitchen, that you have a little workspace there, you can plug stuff in. I saw another kitchen where they had dedicated a couple of the island drawers to the kids' homework supplies.
That's exactly what we did here. So actually on the left-hand side of the island, you open up and there's a bunch of like crayons and books and pullouts, very like kid-friendly, accessible space, so that you can hide all that stuff but still give kids the stuff that they need.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is sort of interesting too, with how do you balance, I think it's often a challenge when you have a fireplace and a TV, how you actually work all that into the space for your focal point. What have you done in this room?
Well, in general, of course, interior designers are always like, oh, I have to put a TV above a fireplace. But again, I think this is about functionality. We always approach the function first. The kids watch movies in this room. It's a family space. So we wanted to make it feel as intentional as possible. So instead of just sort of smacking it on the wall, we actually built in niches for the TV and for the sort of equipment on the side. And the husband on this project really loves his AV stuff. So of course there's a little bit more than normal here, but it makes the space super functional for them. So building it in makes it feel a little bit more intentional. A little pro tip on this though, if you guys do this, always leave a few inches of clearance around any of your goods, because the reality is, as you know, technology, the moment that you buy it, is outdated. So this allows you down the road, if TV sizes change slightly or your equipment changes slightly, still gives you the flexibility to put something new in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. More of that lovely gold.
More styling, yeah.
Is this the same place still?
It is, yeah, this is the kitchen, yeah.
Nice. Again,
I think we've got a new project coming up after the few slides here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So can you tell me about this bedroom?
Yes, this is actually a guest bedroom, believe it or not. It's probably the most beautiful guest bedroom we've ever done. But this wallpaper is actually by an LA designer, Kelly Wursler, so super graphic. And it's in a basement, you know, it's below ground. So we were trying to do something that would bring a little bit more interest to the project. But again, still that monochromatic palette, but introducing texture to sort of keep it really interesting. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to handle behind the bed that way like this, because in Vancouver, being in a seismic zone, people don't like to have artwork above their bed, right?
Yes.
Because, you know, no one wants to wake up with something on their head. So handling the back wall with wallpaper is a creative way to still get something interesting happening there.
Absolutely. We've done wallpaper, we've done mirror before for some of our more ambitious clients.
Right.
You know, all sorts of different finishes on that wall to kind of just create some texture, plaster, etc. if artwork doesn't work. Yeah.
Great. You know, one question I had for you, and I think one of the fears that sometimes people have when they maybe feeling intimidated by the interior design process, is that the designer is going to tell them how they have to live, that they're going to come in with this idea and say, here you go, this is what your new house is going to look like.
Yeah.
But that doesn't have to be the case, right? It should be a good relationship, feels like you get the home that you want.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I'd love to say that there aren't designers that sort of have these niches and that when they design your house, you can sort of tell that they designed your house. But there's also those clients, they want that, so they go to those designers. Right. I think that's, again, about the interview process, is really getting to know your interior designer and making sure that they really understand what you want. We kind of say, we've got sort of a catchphrase like, we don't have a niche, we're about people. So we're sort of the middleman, you know, middle woman between you and your goals in terms of your renovation or your new build. Because also, I think when you're creative, why would we want to do the same thing over and over again? We love it when clients come to us with a new challenge saying like, you know, this is my vision, and we go, this is weird and wacky and wild, and we're going to figure out how we're going to do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Lovely detail. So here we're into a bathroom.
Yeah.
I like this little shelf that's happening over the tub too for reading, making it, bathrooms have really become retreat spaces for people to spend time in. It's not just functional.
Yeah. You know, the bathrooms, the kitchens, the powder rooms are sort of the places in the house that we usually recommend where you spend a little bit more money, put a little bit more effort into it. And yeah, bathtubs are great. You usually find out, you know, either the husband baths or the wife baths, and so we try to make it so that you can put, you know, a side table there so you can have a glass of wine or a cup of tea while you're having a bath and like really relax. I think just with everybody's work schedules now, we have like a very high-paced sort of, you know, North American culture. This is a way to sort of decompress, so people are spending more time, you know, in the master bathroom, sort of relaxing.
Okay.
Yeah. This is a new project.
New space,
yeah.
Eh?
Yeah.
What can you tell me about this place?
So funny enough, this was actually not funny, but it was another client who had been through flood, but we hadn't started their project yet. You know, we were just in the preliminary stages of planning. But what I loved about this project was her father was actually an architect, and he designed the house for them, you know, I think, you know, 20 plus years ago. So it was really important for us to sort of keep the integrity of the original design, but it really did need updating. Like the paint needed to be updated, the floors needed to be updated. It was basically almost a full gut. But she really has an eclectic sense of style. She was joking around. She was like, you better photograph this house before I bring all my stuff in, because she really loves folk art and things like that. But we actually embrace that in our house. So it's sort of weird and quirky. So instead of fighting with those things, we just embraced them and sort of went with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wonder too if we can talk a little bit about budget and how people think about budget. So people generally come to you saying, I have X amount of dollars, what can you do? Or where do you start when you're talking to somebody about their budget?
We see both things. We see some people come to us and they go, hey, I want to do a main floor renovation or basement renovation. You know, I've got $150,000. And we go, you know, that's a great budget. We will sit down and do some preliminary budgeting for you so that you really understand where your money's going. But truthfully, a lot of people need to do these things and they've never done them before and they have no idea how much it costs. So we will actually sit down and sort of get, you know, your wish list. What are all the things that you would love to do? And we start there and we assign a value to it. When we assign a value to these things, it's really easy for you as a client to then say, no, I wanted to do that, but I don't want to spend $20,000 on, you know, a copper bathtub in my basement. Right. But then there's other things where people go, absolutely, doing that is a great idea. And that preliminary budget then makes sure that you set up your expectations very early on. And I think, you know, we were talking about, do you share your budget with your designer? I think absolutely you do, because it's a way for us to start the conversation. Of course, always leave a bit of a contingency, because in renovations especially, things can sort of go sideways.
And do you have a percentage that you recommend for a contingency?
You know, a lot of contractors will usually do between 10 and 15%. Sometimes I've seen as upwards of 20%, especially if you're dealing with a historical home, older property, because you could open up the walls and realize that structurally the home isn't sound, or that the concrete foundation is cracked and needs some repair, or that you might have mold behind your walls in a bathroom. These things all sound really scary, but for us, they happen quite regularly. And so you have to make sure you do some sort of remediation on those things.
Right.
Yeah.
And what about hiring a contractor? Are there certain questions you should be asking right away that people don't?
Yeah. You know, I think the best projects and the most successful projects that we've done is when you engage your architect, your interior designer, and your contractor, if you require all those people, but the contractor almost up front, so that you kind of approach your project in a design build aspect. The contractor and designer then can work together to find solutions that are the most cost effective. We have worked with clients in the past that have, you know, for budget reasons, decided to project manage and do all the construction themselves. And I get it. I've you know, built my own home, and we've renovated a home, and sometimes, you know, from a cost saving standpoint, you need to do that. But I think there's a certain point when you're you know, doing a renovation that might be like $100,000, $200,000. It's about protecting your investment. So pay the money up front to make sure that you're doing things properly. That's super important. Because I can't tell you how many times I've gone into clients' homes and they're like, oh, we ended up spending an extra $50,000 on this because we didn't know what we were doing. Right? So I think it's about protecting your investment and then also making sure it's done properly down the road so you're not fixing mistakes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then if you're interviewing a contractor, what kinds of things do you want to sort of know that they can handle well? How do you get the right contractor? You
know, you hear these horror stories about contractors all the time. I think most importantly is referrals. So actually checking with the referrals. A lot of contractors will now allow you to do a walkthrough in a previous client's home. I think that's really important because then you can see the quality. And also understanding the relationship and the scope of work that the contractor did for that client. Because I think images on a website are really pretty, but it really doesn't say anything about what's behind the walls, what the process was like. And you want to find somebody that I think has experience doing a home of your style and of your scale. You know, we do a lot of commercial work as well, and when we hear that there's a residential contractor doing a commercial project, we're always really scared about that because it's like, it's a completely different ballgame, vice versa. You know, the two different types of design are very different, and construction. Okay. Let's have a look at some more of these images. So in this room, you've got a bit of texture with the sofa. Is that a velvet? It's actually a mohair. Okay. So the family, again, she's got 2 kids, and so this is right off of her kitchen space. She used to be a caterer. She cooks a lot. She makes the most amazing food. So we try to get over there for meals as often as we can. But she entertains a lot. So the idea was to have a very cozy, comfortable sectional in there, and we actually did it custom because we really wanted it to fit sort of in there and have a certain give to it so that people could just sort of like lounge when they're in that space. She loves color and texture and pattern, so there's actually quite a few pops of color throughout this house. Okay. Yeah.
There you are, styling it. So we were talking a little bit about color and texture, and you've got that sort of geode piece of, is it amethyst?
Yeah,
or,
yeah.
Bringing those natural elements into a space too to warm a room up.
I like the sort of one-of-a-kind pieces, right? Those sort of crystal formations are really beautiful, and each of them are totally different. So then you've got kind of a conversation piece on your table.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting treatment on the island. What do you have on the face of the island there?
The face of the island is actually, it's mirror. It's sort of an antiqued mirror. So we wanted to do something a little bit different here. She didn't want to do a formal bar, which most people are doing, right? To have people pull up to. Because she had a little table off to the side, and because she had lived in this house for a good portion of her life, that's sort of what she knew and what she was comfortable with. So we've got mirror on the front, and then actually, interestingly enough, in the back, we ended up salvaging her original hood fan. And at first we were like, I don't know if this is going to work with the design. But as we were going through the process, we decided that we were going to make a change and just put a piece of metal up behind there and keep her original hood fan. So it's a little weird and it's a little out of place and a little quirky. And I think it suited her personality, and we liked the quality that it brought into that room. And again, conversation piece. It was the hood fan that she had always cooked under when she had her catering business and when she had entertained for the last 20 years. So, you know, some of those little pieces can definitely be brought in even when you're renovating.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've heard this many times too, how important it is to try to make your space as personal to you as possible too.
Yeah.
You're inevitably going to go in with a big, you know, book of magazine clippings and house links and all that sort of stuff you like, but how do you create a space that really means a lot to you? So when you're walking in the door, it's truly your space. You know,
styling is really important, and I think it's one of the things that people miss from a budget standpoint too. So you've got your construction budget, but then you also need your furniture, accessories, and artwork budget, because those are sort of the things that finish off a space. I always sort of compare it to if you had a little black dress on and then you left the house without your jewelry, right? It would be awfully plain. You'd still look great, but it could look a little bit better, right? So I think styling is important, and I think having that character piece in it is really good. The problem is people go out and they go to one store and they buy everything in one stop and it matches, instead of sort of taking the time to curate a really sort of eclectic, personalized collection of accessories that then if somebody's in your home, really speak to who you are. You know, I should be able to walk into your home and sort of understand what you're all about. It's the same way about what we choose to put on our bodies when we leave the house, and the way we communicate with people, the type of work we do, the type of organizations we belong to. It's one other communication point about, you know, who we are.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any questions right now? We'll keep going, but just throwing that out there. Okay. We'll have a little bit of time at the end for questions too. So this is more details in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's an interesting light installation.
This is a really cool feature. So, like I said, her father designed this house, and so she'd always had issues because it was like this space in here, right? You've got skylight above here, which is really beautiful during the day. You've got this natural light that floods in, but again, she entertains a lot, and her dining table is underneath here. And so really, she just had these sconces on the side of the wall, which don't really provide adequate light. So we had to figure out how to get light in here, but also we didn't want to take away from that sculptural architectural quality. So we decided to do something that looked more like installation as opposed to, you know, a single pendant hanging down. So we sort of flooded this space with these really beautiful lights by Marset called the Nenefar, and they just give this really soft light that sort of sprinkles throughout the space. So now at nighttime when she's, you know, entertaining, they're not all sitting there with flashlights trying to see what their food looks like. Yeah.
Well, and interesting too, those chairs that are up on the second level that you can see there have a different pattern on the back, because that's what you can see from down below.
Yeah, and you know, those chairs, same thing, they were in the flood, and so they had some damage on them. So what we did is we took them to a reupholstery company. They had significant meaning to her because the Queen had actually sat in one of them. So we removed the fabric from the chairs, and we actually framed the fabric so that she could keep that sort of original intent. And then we reupholstered the chairs, repainted the arms to get rid of the watermarks. And yeah, exactly what you said, we finished the pattern a little bit differently on the back so that when you look up at that catwalk, you see some interesting color and pattern. Yeah. Closet.
This looks like, a dressing room that everybody would love.
Yes. Yeah, she wanted everything behind doors in here, and so we did sort of something interesting here. She used to have a closet that was very small, and then an office that she uses a lot, and it looks out at the road, and she loves the view. And again, she's always sat at that desk, looked out at that view, so we wanted to maintain that. So what we did is we actually combined her closet and her office, which was kind of tough to sell at first to her. But then when we talked about it being this really beautiful room and the clothes were sort of behind doors, then it just becomes an extension of this. It sort of feels like you're in a hotel, right? Where you've got these beautiful built-ins and then she's got a desk off to the side.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is it connected to the master bathroom here?
So the master bathroom is just down the hall, and same thing. Again, it was really strangely spaced, so we sort of like renegotiated all of this space to make it much more functional. The entrance to her shower literally used to be like this big. So I was like, this needs to change. And we actually were able to give her his and her sort of vanities, which is kind of nice because then they get their own space. And then also a separate toilet room and a shower, just by sort of moving around the space upstairs, stealing a little bit of space from that office at the one side of the house.
Okay.
Yeah.
More views to that beautiful bathroom.
There were, that was just a little photo showing the sort of next to the bathtub, seeing that little table for a cup of tea, etc.
There. So now this is a study area?
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, she had bookcases here before, so we wanted to keep the original intent. Her living room is really, really long and narrow, so we had a seating area, and this becomes sort of a secondary seating area, especially when you're entertaining. If there's some guests that want a little bit of a quieter space, this is an example of that bonus room, what we end up doing, right? Ends up being sort of a reading area, or where you sit down with your partner and have a glass of wine at the end of the day, making it a little bit special and feeling a little bit different than the rest of the house.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have just a few minutes left, so I wanted to throw it out if there are any questions. Anybody have any questions for Amanda?
Questions? Oh, okay.
Like, it's an issue sometimes when the owner has an idea of what they want, so they want you to do it, but then you do it, and then they say, well, but
It doesn't work?
doesn't sometimes, it changes when you're in the middle of a project?
Mm-hmm. There's different, should I repeat the question?
Sure.
Okay, so everybody can hear it. She's basically asking if, some clients have very strong opinions on the design. They might change their mind during the process, and, how we work with those types of clients. Like in any industry, we're working with people, and I always say that, commercial design is very different because people are sort of invested in, creating emotion, whereas residential design, clients are very emotionally invested in their project. It's a really personal process. And so, we've got clients that they've got really specific requirements. I mean, hopefully, though, you figure out how to work with these people because you've built this relationship at this point where you can say, like, hey, I'm going to pick my battles with you, and this is going to be one of them. And that's the thing. I think ultimately, when you've got a great relationship, when the client's able to sort of give up a little bit of the control and give it to the designer, and you've got a great designer, your project ends up being better. But that's not to say that we haven't had projects where, we've had clients that they want it exactly like this, and so we do it like that for them. But you always hope that you get to push people a little bit outside of their comfort zones, because that's when you end up with something really interesting. Yeah.
Any other questions? Why don't we end by talking about trends? I know you have a specific opinion about trends. People feel like they need to know what the latest trends are in home design. What's your take on it?
Yeah, we get asked all the time what trends are, and certainly I suppose that there are trends. What we were talking about earlier, the sort of brass and bronze, it's definitely a trend right now. You see it. But I think when you're investing the types of money that we do on our home, you want to make sure that you're choosing things that are timeless. So the design that we do generally for residential is very, very timeless. When you're doing commercial space, you can tend to push the boundaries a little bit more. But I think if you're going to incorporate trends in the same way you would in your wardrobe, it would be more about accent pieces and maybe not spending a ton of money on those things, because ultimately down the road, again, you're going to be like, oh, this is out. Now everybody's doing rose gold. Everybody's doing a brushed copper. So a good way to do that is to introduce it in, say, throw pillows, blankets. Here's a perfect example, tabletop accessories. When you tire of them, maybe they get recycled or donated, or, they end up at your parents' house, who knows? But you haven't invested a ton of money on that small piece.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess, trends are sort of personal. Like, I can tell you what my trends are right now. Like, I'm crazy about jewel tones, which is obvious. But that's just what I feel, right? I think everybody just has a personal style, and you should just sort of go with, like, what feels really good to you.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Lovely.
Well, thank you for joining us. Again, this
Thank
is
you.
Amanda Hamilton of Amanda Hamilton Interior Design. I'm Anicka Quin of Western Living Magazine. We're going to have talks all week if you want to check the board and come back and join us. Thanks very much.
Lovely. Thank you.